Welcome everybody to the weekly Live with Dr. McDougall webinars. I'm Gustavo Tolosa, the host, and today we have a very special guest. I think you all know, of course, and our guest speaker today is Dr. Doug Lisle. Just a few words. I know that most of you here are familiar with him and his amazing work, but Dr. Doug Lisle is a psychologist for the McDougall Wellness Program and also the director of research for True North Health Center, where I was last week, and I enjoyed very much my 10-day stay. And Dr. Lisle has lectured at Stanford, Cornell, and other universities, and is the co-author of The Pleasure Trap: Mastering the Hidden Force That Undermines Health and Happiness. And he's also the founder of Esteem Dynamics. You can visit his really great website with so much resources there, so many resources at esteemdynamics.org. I will put it here in the chat so you all can have it. And I have to say a few words now, as I consider myself a friend now, Dr. Lisle. I've had a few sessions with him and I've had the chance to visit with him. I meet a lot of people when I travel, a lot of people in the health profession and in the arts as well. As you all know, I'm a pianist. And I do meet a lot of smart people, but I want to say this, and it comes from the bottom of my heart. I don't want to embarrass you, Dr. Lisle, but he is one of the most intelligent and smartest people. In my opinion, he's up there in the genius category. I think that what he has to say deserves to be heard by everybody in this world, and everybody here today. We're very lucky to have access to Dr. Lisle. And I want to welcome you, Dr. Lisle, and thank you so much. I know you're in California, in Santa Rosa. How are you doing today?
Good, everything's great. Thanks for having me, Gustavo.
You're welcome. This is my pleasure. And today we have a ton of questions, way more than we can possibly cover in about 45 minutes that we have with you today. I encourage everybody to watch the previous 2 webinars that we did with you, where you answered so many important questions. So I will try to do my best to avoid asking questions that were addressed in previous webinars and go with new ones. So I have questions that people have already submitted, and I will give priority to those. And then, but go ahead and write down questions, everybody, here in the chat area, and I will try to get to them. I know, Dr. Lisle, that you would probably be able to spend an hour on each question because, of course, your knowledge is so vast. And I just want to ask you to see if you could give the most concise answer, to see if we could just pack in as many questions as we can this morning, if that's okay with you.
Very gently done, Gustavo.
Well, I know, I've heard you speak, and I can tell you, there are some questions here that you can do a whole seminar on just one. So I mean it, I really do. So are we ready? You want to? Let's go on. So here's the first question. How do you feel about 12-step programs for addiction in general and for food addiction in particular?
12-step programs can be immensely helpful for people. This depends on, this is very much an individual thing. So for example, AA being the original major model for 12-step, certain characteristics of the 12-step model are problematic for certain people based on their belief structures and also their personalities. And so for some people, it's not a good fit. For other people, it's a very good fit. And so it's essentially, you have to figure that one out. That's one that you have to learn by doing and see whether or not it fits with who it is that you are. When it comes to eating, 12-step readings, I would say that, again, it's the same kind of an idea. If a person gets, this is a very good social support type of system for them, and it's a useful thing for them to have a sponsor and have all this kind of support and a structure for what to do during times of the day when they may be weak, then it's fine. However, often what is being taught or the concepts there are not necessarily that square with human nature. So I would say that if you can if you can use the social support, that you can stand to kind of keep your mouth shut and not be arguing with people when you learn better than they know. If you can essentially, it's like any group. If you can benefit from the group but not have to feel like you have to educate the group where they're wrong, then it's a good thing. So this is my feelings about it are not strong either way. It's truly my feeling about it is completely pragmatic in nature, and each individual has to learn by doing.
Very good. Thank you very much. Here's another question. All of the programs, this person says, all of the programs that I have looked into that treat food addiction, and I know you've talked about food addiction really not mean food addiction, but like OA and FAA, have you weighing and measuring all of your food, even non-starchy vegetables, on a food scale for the rest of your life and reporting it to your sponsor who, what are you going to eat the day before? This seems like madness to me and not very sustainable. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, this is exactly the problem, is that these types of programs usually at their core, they don't understand what we understand here at the McDougall program. So, however, believe it or not, some people have personalities where this works well for them. And so it can be something that they may do for a while, and it may help them rein in some of their more excessive, habits. So I do think that fundamentally there's some serious mistakes there. And I actually was talking to a friend of mine who was witnessing a lady that's in this type of a program. She was at lunch. It was a business lunch. And the lady who's, has a serious weight problem that has not changed in years, is in one of these programs and put, I think it was cheese, chicken, and salad dressing all over her salad, and literally scooped off the cheese, the chicken, and the salad dressing, and then stared at her plate and said, "Oh, all that's left is the lettuce." So this is, unless you actually grasp what it is that we talk about here at the McDougall program, you're probably going to be in trouble. So, but if you carry this information into these other arenas with you and modify what it is that they're talking about, in the direction of some sanity, then sometimes the social support can be useful.
Right. Well, that is kind of a funny story. Okay, another question. The programs that treat food addiction say you can only recover if you eat animal protein. The few that allow a person to be vegan say you must eat a lot of beans and nuts, both of which I'm allergic to, because potatoes and sweet potatoes are not good for food addicts who, they say, have carbohydrate sensitivity. Do you agree with this?
This is total nonsense, and the people that are saying this don't know anything. So what can you say? The misinformation is extraordinary. If this were true, then we would have a bunch of obese Chinese that are, because we've got 1 billion of them over there eating nothing but carbohydrate. And the last I checked, those were thin, fit people. So these are people that are essentially confused and or dishonest, and are telling people what they want to hear, which is that they're going to have to eat some steak. And forget it. We don't need to pay attention to this kind of ignorance. It's tragic, because people have been coached that carbohydrates are the big evil, where any physiologist would tell you that you are a carbohydrate burning machine. It's very clear, if you study physiology, that that's how human beings are built. We need a little bit of protein. We need a little bit of essential fatty acids, but essentially you're a carbohydrate burning machine. So to think that eating carbohydrates is a problem is ridiculous. And of course, the McDougall program, we totally distinguish between refined carbohydrates and whole natural carbohydrates. Those are very different products in terms of how it is that the body deals with them. And even the refined carbohydrates are not particularly pernicious. They're not as pernicious as the animal food. So but to be afraid of potatoes and sweet potatoes is a classic and major mistake. And so for goodness sakes, if you're not convinced yet, reread the starch solution.
Right. Well, like what you said, it's so true. The amount of misinformation is just monumental at this point, and it's driven by money, basically. What you said is tragic, and it's people that are dishonest, that are just trying to sell something that appeals to the people. Yeah.
Good news about their bad habits.
Right. Yeah. We all want to hear what good news.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to eat the cheesesteak instead of the baked potato.
Right.
Oh, that's too bad, but I have to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Here is a lady that is asking, that is saying that she has had a lot of success with the plant-based way of eating, and she's concerned about her 20-year-old daughter who's living away from home and has gained about 50 pounds, 50, over the past 3 years. She knows the right thing to do, but it's caught in the pleasure trap. Is there anything I can do to help her? I guess this is a mother concerned about her daughter.
Yes, I would say that I'm sure the daughter is very concerned. And so as a mom, you're desperate to try to push this information sort of down their throats and make them absorb it and start to utilize it. But the truth is that probably our best move is to not touch it, to stay away from this as much as you can, and try to not essentially. The girl knows if you're a mature educated mom and you've got a daughter with this problem, I have no doubt that daughter knows a lot. Okay, so she knows what direction she ought to be going, but she's in the trap and she's struggling with the trap. But the last thing we need is to set the expectations up that she's going to do something about it. When she starts to make the move, we want that move to be very, very quiet, private, and to have her self-esteem start to turn as she starts to decide that she's going to do something. And we're not sure when that's going to hit. You may, actually, I would point her towards my website because the STEAM process is exactly what this is about. So you might want to tell the daughter, there's a fun little webinar that Dr. Lisle did called the Slow Fast Way, and it seemed like a fun thing. And that would be about it. Okay, that would be about as pushy as I would get. And one day that girl might watch that thing and then get a little bit of traction. So this is motivation in this arena is surprisingly touchy and fragile. And so it's not a matter of any kind of big push at people. There are subtle little internal dynamics that will have a person decide that it's worth risking their own self-regard at some point to actually take a shot at it and put some energy behind it. And but you would be surprised how much risk that is for people, because they are essentially in a situation where if they start to try and then they fail, they feel worse about themselves. And so the last thing they want to do is have that process also be public. So this girl's journey is going to be quiet. We want her to know what the best road is to go down this direction, which she obviously already knows. This will percolate, and this may percolate for several years before we get any traction. Oops, I lost you. I lost the audio.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's always fine point of how much to push.
Yes. Yeah, usually less is better.
Right.
Yes.
Right. The book that you wrote, The Pleasure Trap, did you have a certain age in mind? Can a 13-year-old, a 20-year-old read the book and still, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
It's a pretty difficult book. So The Pleasure Trap is certainly for adults, and it's for adults that are pretty smart. That the concepts are not that easily grasped by, say, an average person. Now we can make it simpler with the speech that I give called The Pleasure Trap is at a level there where the average guy can understand it. But most people need to, in order to read The Pleasure Trap, they need to be a little bit above average, which essentially all McDougallers are. Because if you've read The Starch Solution, you can read The Pleasure Trap. But reading at this level, this is sort of an above average thing, and it isn't that it requires this to do it, but to sort of grasp the essentials here of how the nature of this argument. It takes a little bit of chops, and like I said, those chops are the standard fare at every McDougall event that I've ever seen. People do understand what we're talking about, but this is not for children, and it's not actually meant for people that may struggle with things that have some complexity.
Right. All right. Very good. I think there is a really good question here. Someone that says, I have been sober, clean, and abstinent food abuse for 30 years. I left OA years ago because all the members are obese. Thus, eating plant-based whole food, the obsession to abuse food has left. I agree with Dr. Lisle that food is not an addiction. It is an obsession with processed crappy food. I guess that was a good comment. And following that comment, would you just briefly comment on what are the main differences between what people call food addiction and emotional eating?
Yeah, that's a fruitful thing to talk about, I suppose. I don't actually like to call this food addiction precisely, even though we could, and it would be. I think it's possibly in most cases overly dramatized. The addiction technically, not that we have to wander into what's technical, but what's technically considered addiction in the world of psychology and psychiatry is that you actually have a major withdrawal process. And so with respect to food, we don't have a major withdrawal process. We have an annoying, mild withdrawal process. However, the way I like to look at this is to say that it's addiction-like, or it certainly has addiction-like characteristics. And actually, it's what I would consider kind of a mild addiction. But the thing is about it is that it doesn't, when an addiction is mild, it can still be just a gentle force that's constantly pulling you in the wrong direction. And so, but it's not the same. This is not like breaking off a heroin or breaking off an alcohol. So it's a very different psychological process than going through those extraordinarily tumultuous recoveries. It's more, it's closer, somewhere halfway in between a bad habit and an addiction, is the way I would look at the whole problem of the pleasure trap with respect to food. Similarly, incidentally, this is also why it is not actually clear the best path to do it. When we are dealing with addictions, it's almost always the best move with respect to addictions, essentially, is that as fast as you can, you try to get completely clean, and you set up everything in your life. You get rid of your friends, you get rid of your drug dealer, in other words, you have somebody lock up the money, you do everything different so that you can't get to, or that you won't. You set up barriers, because essentially one slip can be tremendously problematic. Food doesn't have that same characteristic typically. In other words, for most people, So here's what I'm getting at. Solving an addiction problem usually involves all or nothing. And the reason is that the nature of the substance itself is so disturbing for brain chemistry that we essentially, that's our best bet. Now I want to point out that you don't hack off any other problem in life that way. Every other problem in life, learning to walk, learning to talk, learning to play the piano, learning to do math, everything else that you have ever learned to do, you actually do it in successive stages where you get a little bit better at a time of practice. With addiction, the big push is that you get completely clean all at once. Okay? Now, why? The answer is because the substance itself is so problematic that literally it's your best chance. Okay? It isn't that it makes sense, it's just that we have a completely unnatural problem that is calling for an unnatural solution. Now, with respect to food, this is the argument that rages in our field, and it's some folks, like my friend Dr. Alan Goldhammer and probably John McDougall and most people say, look, you ought to be completely clean. Because if you're 1 inch over, you're just going to get enticed into the trap. Now, why do they say this? Because they've seen people with that level of problem, okay? But I would also, as someone who's worked belly to belly with 1,000 people on this issue, I know that that isn't true for everybody. Okay, so this is not like heroin. It is not as simple as a bad habit. It's somewhere in the middle, and some people can attack this problem in successive stages quite well. In fact, many people do. So many people get rid of the meat first, but they can't get rid of the dairy for a while. A year or two later, then they get rid of the dairy because then they got to learn to make those changes. And then after they get rid of the dairy and the meat, then maybe they start to get rid of the oil. In other words, so very many people do this journey in successive approximations without going 100 to 0. So this is how it is that I think about this issue. But I do not think about it as one way or the other. I think about it as an addiction-like problem that every individual has somewhat different strengths and weaknesses with respect to how they can best manage it. Now, emotional eating is boy, is that a buzzword. I get that question all the time, and I'm almost puzzled by what people mean, and I sort of do know what they mean, but I'm going to tell you that I have a very negative reaction to that concept, and I have it for the following reason. Because there's an underlying theory that sits under the concept of emotional eating that says this. And so this is what I'm reacting to. So if people hear me reacting negatively to the concept of emotional eating, this is what I'm reacting to. What I'm reacting to is essentially psychodynamic theory in psychology that says that the reason you're doing this is for deep-seated personal problems. Okay? This is not true, folks. You are not eating for any deep-seated personal problems. This is not the case. The reason I can prove it in about 18 different ways. First of all, extensive research on eating disorders has shown that people with, for example, overeating, compulsive overeating, do not have any other psychological problems that are not directly related. There is no additional other problems in their life. Okay, the other pathologies. It is also the case that if you put this food in the cage of any animal on earth, they absolutely prefer it, and they will absolutely eat the junk food. Okay, so the issue is that since we already know that this is the characteristic pattern of animal life, of course this is what we're going to expect. Okay, so now people are confused because they are compelled towards rich foods, and yet they know that they shouldn't do it if they want to lose weight, look better, and feel better. So they have great cognitive dissonance over this issue. And when they fail in their willpower and they wind up indulging, they, instead of saying, well, I just defaulted to what any animal on earth would do, following the extraordinarily powerful instincts that have been built into me by nature, instead of inferring that, they are confused by their own failure and they say, it's some horrible underlying problem that I must be having that is driving this. There is no underlying horrible problem that we need to excavate with psychobabble. Okay? What we have is an extraordinarily challenging situation that it actually requires everything to be in a very good line for you to defend against it. Okay? I think I probably didn't say this last time, but this is how I look at healthy living. I look at healthy living like being in a submarine 2 miles under the ocean with tremendous pressure, that the water is trying to get into that submarine effectively. And if you're in that submarine, you know that if there's one little rivet loose, the water's going to come in, and then behind that opportunity, it's going to push those rivets further, and it's going to sink that submarine. The pressure is everywhere. This is exactly analogous to what healthy living faces. That your mind is actually full of pressure telling you to eat rich food, and you are in an environment where you are surrounded by it. Okay? The rich food is trying to get into your submarine. It is pushing like crazy to get into that submarine. If everything is right and all of the rivets are in good shape and the pressure is not too great, you can keep the water out. Okay? But as soon as we get any kind of turbulence, we get a little too excited. We're with our friends. We have a little tough stuff at work. We're having to stay up late and take care of business. The kid is crying till 4 in the morning. In other words, people then think, quote, they eat for emotional reasons, and then that's why they get into the junk. And what I'm telling you is no. Life turbulence causes there to be a lowering of your defenses. And once your defenses are lowered, then the water rushes in, okay? And once a little bit gets in, it's a lot easier for the rest to get in. So this is, quote, the process of emotional eating. And don't be thinking that if you're struggling with this, it means that there's anything deep and strange and that needs to be excavated, because there isn't. What there is a surprisingly and deceptively difficult organizational challenge for your life. And we need to focus on the details of literally where is the food going to be when you're hungry and how are we going to get it into you. These very interesting, or actually uninteresting, minor league technical details of how it is that we can get healthy food close to us so that it outcompetes the junk food that is everywhere.
Right. Dr. Lisle, you have other videos. I can hear an echo.
Okay.
Could you lower your volume a little?
I know how to do that.
From the left, from the keys here, where you see the little. It's okay.
It's okay. Hold on. Did I just lower my volume a little bit?
Yes, I think that's better. Okay, very good. Someone was asking about if you have videos on your website, but I think you do, and I think many of your videos are also on Dr. McDougall's website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So everything isn't everywhere at once, but yes, there's videos on my website that are free, and as well as a lot of audio things where I answer specific questions. So there's a lot of good stuff there.
Okay, and it is steamdynamics.org. Right. Okay. And also, just want to mention that you also do from the steamdynamics.org. People can contact you and set a one-on-one session with you.
Sure. They can also write to me at the website that has my email address and ask me questions. I'm always glad to try to help any way I can.
Very good. Very good. So. Here we have someone saying, I am not concerned about emotional overeating, emotional in quotation marks, or eating, but habitual overeater. I cannot stop until it hurts, even of whole foods. Can one just form a habit circuit and stop it by restricting portions?
I would say in general this. The first question I have to ask with somebody with that question is, what's your height and weight? And the reason is that I will have people that impress themselves and are a little overwhelmed with how much it is that they eat, but it turns out they're completely normal height and weight. So in other words, what we're seeing is the hunger drive, no matter how spectacular and bizarre it looks to the individual, looks like it's doing its job perfectly. Okay? Now, let's suppose that somebody's 10 or 20% overweight. So we got a person that ought to be 150 pounds and they're 180 pounds. And this is what their habit is. Then I would say, well, this is kind of interesting. And it's essentially always the case that the food that they're cramming in there late in the game is going to tend to be the richest food that's in their kitchen, and that is because your motivation is run by cost-benefit analysis, and so the benefit is to your survival for the calories, and it's being judged by how tasty the food is, and the cost is going to be how much energy it takes to chew it up, and also whatever the money that it might have cost to get it, but essentially there's an effort ratio. Cost benefit that is being run in the nervous system, which is what decides whether or not we do that behavior. So it's essentially never going to be the case that the person is going to chew raw carrots to the point of the time that their stomach hurts. That's because the raw carrots don't have enough calories, it's too much energy to chew, and essentially the cost benefit doesn't seem worth it to the organism. Now, remember that you evolved in an environment of scarcity. So your neural circuits were designed by nature to push you pretty hard to eat, and if there's extra food around, push you a little bit further. Like your nervous system is not aware that you are in an environment of bounty and that there's plenty of food down at the grocery store. You don't really think that way, and so if you'll even, I believe that actually people, I think we've seen studies of this, where people at a buffet will actually be a little bit facilitated in their eating behavior because they're feeling the possibility that the food's going to all be gone, or they're feeling this almost competitive process. You'll certainly see dogs this way. They'll get feverish, and even a dog all by itself with its own food bowl will a lot of times eat very, very quickly. This can be a program of effectively a pack animal that has to better get the food now and eat it very quickly because other animals are eating that food competitively very quickly. So there's an anxiety about getting enough that can be, essentially a little low-grade circuit that is sitting inside of a person that's on their couch, and they're full, but there's still some food around. But the food that they're going to be interested in is going to be the highest calorie-dense food that's in their house. Now, this is the problem with having high calorie-dense food in your house, particularly if it's the slightest bit doctored up. And when I say the slightest bit doctored up, I'm talking about, we have some nuts, but they're salted a little bit, okay? Why would or God forbid, we've got peanut butter and bread. Anything that's going to be artificially rich, in other words, it's been processed in a way, this is going to be now a supernormal stimuli with respect to the cost-benefit analysis of what this food is worth to the organism. So essentially, you've got a nervous system that's cataloging that you've had enough to eat, and you can feel the stretch in your stomach, and you don't feel any more hunger, and you're actually getting a stop sign. Well, the only thing that will go back through a stop sign is a car that's moving too fast. And the car that's moving too fast is food that is not natural. So I rarely see any behavior that looks like this if the food is truly natural. Probably the only thing that I'm going to see with natural food might be handfuls of nuts and seeds late in the game after you're completely full. But if that's true, we better check and make sure those nuts and seeds are raw. If they are in fact raw, then that's sort of an exception that I'm not shocked by. Again, it's an unnatural situation because we would never have unlimited access to large amounts of nuts and seeds, particularly that have been shelled, okay, and they're all convenient and ready to eat. So when we look inside this question, once again, what we see is we see the human nervous system in its natural form sitting right next to or on top of an unnatural situation, and that's what's driving the behavior, okay? So we need to look at behaviors in that way and see, but I think most of the time for most of the people that ask that question, we're going to find out that the food that they're cramming in has been doctored and is of high calorie density, and that's what they're piling in on top of the other food once they're satisfied. And that's what we have to look out for.
Right. Well, there may be more specifics to this person asking the question, and without going into more details, if she has more questions, she probably would need to ask you in person because we could go on for a long time with this question. It's a very good question. So what about the biological differences that, let's say, allow one person to eat fat and not be overweight, and then another person that just looks at something that is fat and it gets, overweight by not even trying it, or having a little bit. One person is asking, are some of us just doomed to be overweight,
Yes.
and then others never destined basically to be thin? Are we doomed, or is there a way out?
Yes, nobody is doomed to be overweight. No animal in nature is designed with neural circuits that would cause it to systematically overeat. Okay, that would be a biological disaster, and the genes are not built that way. So whoever you are and whatever it is that you're facing, you are actually not designed to be defeated. Now, here's our problem. There are certainly major individual differences in how sort of thick and curvy human beings are. And so there's interesting, historical reasons why it is that that's true. Certain people have had ancestors over the last 1,000 years that lived in habitats where there was a periodic famine, and all it would take would be for your ancestors of the last 600 years to have several of those individuals have lived through an extreme famine somewhere, and if they did, they were the ones that had the genes that had extra fat on them. Okay, so as a result, that gene could be passed down to you today, and therefore now you're living in an environment that does not have any famine, and so you are likely to be thicker or curvier than another individual. So these are reasons why there's individual differences in people, and now those genetic differences do not dictate that anybody is ever fat. In other words, you're designed by nature with a hunger drive that should be hitting your motivational systems in a way that you should get this right. Now, if you're not getting it right and you're overweight, there's one primary reason why that's true, and that's that the food is artificially rich. Okay, if you are eating the food of your natural history, even with those genes, all that those genes are going to do is they're going to make you maybe 10% heavier than someone who might be average. So let's suppose it's a woman who's 5'4", and the average woman on an excellent diet and lifestyle would be 125 pounds. And our girl is 135. She's just that much curvier, okay? And so she's naturally thicker, and but she's not fat, actually. Her fat content is higher, but she's in excellent physical condition. Very possible you could have a person like that. But if you have those genes, and we let those genes loose in a world where there's a bunch of processed food, then we're going to have that person by the time they're 50 is going to be 185 pounds. And the reason is that those genes cannot handle the richness of the diet. And so you are not doomed at all. If you the first move, I have many people over the last 20 years of working with John McDougall, where they find out about this and they eat the McDougall diet. And after the McDougall diet, they've got 100 pounds to lose and they lose 50. And then they stop, okay? And it's like, wow, what's going on there? And what's going on there is the McDougall diet is an excellent diet and it's a healthy diet. However, the normal McDougall diet has some processed food in it, of which most people are completely fine with. So pasta, bread, veggie burgers, etc. In other words, these, if they're biochemically good foods, they're not a problem. However, for some people, they are a problem because that amount of processing is actually not natural, and therefore a few members of our species, 15 or 20% of them, are still going to overeat on those foods. So then we have to go to essentially the maximum weight loss plan, where we are getting rid of those foods. Now we're minimizing them to a very low level, and then they'll lose another chunk of weight. Now we can actually find people that even on that, they might be 10% overweight. So a person that ought to be 135 might be 150. They're saying, well, I'm doing the maximum weight loss plan. Well, then we have to look inside, even within what they're doing, and we may find a few other little quirks. For example, it could be that they're under-exercised. And so we have to understand that our ancestors were fairly vigorous exercisers. Now, most people don't need to be vigorous exercisers in order to be at an excellent weight, but a few people need to do more than they're doing. So they might say, well, I thought that if I did, 30 minutes 3 times a week, that was all my heart needed. It may be all your heart needed, but it might not be all that your genes need. If you're in an environment where there's plenty of food and you've got curvy genes, and at that point, you may need to exercise more like our ancestors. And believe me, your ancestors worked a heck of a lot harder than people do in the modern environment, even that go to the gym. Okay, so our ancestors were foraging all day long and working pretty hard and working many miles. And so as a result, sometimes that needs to be tweaked, not to 4 hours a day, but it may need to be tweaked in order for people to have a little bit more success. So nobody is doomed. Okay, your nature would never build you in a way to be unattractive and have extra weight that you could get caught by predators, or have extra weight where it would put extra pressure on your joints that would not be optimal. And no way would your nature want you to waste the time and energy to get food that you didn't need. So your biology is built beautifully to get this right. If you're not getting it right, even though you're doing quite a good job, it just tells you that you've got particularly thick genes, and we need to attend the fine details in order for you to be fine.
Now, would you say that under no circumstances someone would need to control portion sizes ever?
Well, let's talk about portion sizes of what?
Right. Let's say that it is someone that follows a pretty strict,
there's going to be. I've heard of people that will eat diets that are somewhat unbalanced, that might just be very, very heavy in the starches. And there are individuals that if they do that, they'll keep extra weight on them. But again, they're not eating a natural diet. That's actually not a natural diet for our species. Natural diet for our species would have a considerable amount of raw food. Okay, when you look at people in hunter-gatherer societies, they essentially are eating raw food all day long, and then they're eating their cooked food at night. Now, we don't have to do that. Okay, and it's not a problem. But people that are eating just, for example, and this is a minority of people, but there are people that if they skip over the vegetables and they skip over the fruit and they skip over the salad, and all of their eating essentially is very heavily laden starch diet, they could be overweight. Okay, they might be looking quite healthy and their blood looks good because it's healthy food, but they might actually be struggling with their weight. So that is possible. So I would say it's not going to be possible. You don't have to restrict portions as long as we're getting a diet that reflects the diet of the natural history of the species. And that means, fruits. It means often I see people doing 2 out of 3 major things well. So they'll either have salad and starch, or they'll have vegetables and starch, but they don't have salad and vegetables and starch. Okay, it's what I call the 2 out of 3 plan. And so 2 out of 3, for most people is great. 2 out of 3 for people that have very curvy or thick genes is very likely not going to be good enough. So all 3 pieces have to be in the puzzle, essentially on a daily basis. That's how we have to look at our diet: salad, vegetables, and starch. We could throw fruit in there, but we know we're going to eat fruit, and fruit is low calorie density, so that's not a problem. But salad, vegetables, and starch, all 3 are the components of a balanced diet for people.
Right. All right. Very good. Very, very, very good answer and very good question. Dr. Lisle says here, if you found yourself suddenly stuck in the pleasure trap, what would be your plan of action?
That's a good question. I think maybe, I don't even know because I haven't really thought about it, but I would say a couple of things that I think are fast ways out. Probably the biggest problem with the pleasure trap is, and particularly once you know and understand it, is that there's a self-disgust that comes with this, where we are frustrated with ourselves. You have an internal audience that I've spoken about in other videos that essentially watches you and judges you. And when you are disgusting your own internal audience, there's a tendency to just not care and just say forget it or whatever, and basically act like a high school kid who has kind of been rejected for a date, and then he acts like he doesn't care. Okay? This is human nature. So in other words, we essentially protect our own self-regard by acting like we don't really care, and then acting in ways that are making it very clear to ourselves that we don't care. And in order to change that and shift that, we need to have an enhancement of our own self-regard. It's very useful to know that that enhancement can happen very quickly. It cannot happen through internal self-talk. Cognitive therapy is talking back to the internal critic isn't going to do it. Neither is any kind of, just, Yahoo, happy pop psychology. We're going to look in a mirror that, Stuart Smalley on Saturday Night Live parodied for all those years. This is not going to do it. Let me tell you what does it. Your internal audience is completely intelligent. They're watching you and they know exactly what you're doing. If you impress the internal audience, that is the quickest way to turn this around and make yourself care and get back in the game. Okay? And the quickest way to turn around your own internal self-regard with respect to health behaviors is to exercise vigorously. And let me tell you why. Okay? If you decide, well, what I ought to do is eat a healthy meal and really get back on track. The problem is if you manage to eat a healthy meal or two in a row on the day that you're going to theoretically turn this thing around, you know you can give this thing back at midnight with a box full of Tofuti cuties. You can blow this new regime very easily, and you likely will. So the problem is that's not going to enhance your self-regard. And so you get no good voice from inside saying you did a great thing. Whereas if you go to the gym and you exercise very hard to the point where, you know what, it's like, oh man, I'm going to feel this tomorrow. But you push yourself and you're like, no, I'm not going to back off quite yet. I'm going to push myself just that much further. If you push yourself and you walk out of that gym an hour and 20 minutes later like, whoa, you know what I mean? If Dr. Lisle had seen that, he'd be like, wow, did you push it? And don't injure yourself or have a heart attack. But I'm talking about pushing those muscles very hard to the point where they're wobbling and wiggling and you are kind of shaky walking out of there. That's what I'm talking about, and let me tell you what happens. Your internal audience knows how hard you worked, okay? And you can't give it back. You can't blow it at night with Tofuti cuties because the truth is you earned it. And the internal audience says, whoa, did you work hard, okay? That puts a wind at the back of your internal self-regard that other healthful behavior cannot, because it was gritty and it was hard and you did some suffering and you vetted it through. One of my very favorite clients is just the love, and she's a woman that has actually very naturally high self-esteem. But she struggles with this, and she goes back and forth and gains 30 pounds, loses 30 pounds, gains 30 pounds, loses 30 pounds. And this has been going on for 20 years I've known her. And so one day she texted me, and she said, Doug, I just need one of your quick things that'll make me feel better about myself. I'm so disgusted. I've gotten fat again. I just don't feel like doing anything about it, and I'm just depressed. And say something. And I texted her back, and I said, go to the gym and work out really hard. Okay, your internal audience will not be able to miss it, and you will feel the self-esteem that comes with having impressed yourself from doing the hard work. I said, skipping the junk food today won't do that. That will not give it to you, but if you go and work really hard this afternoon, you can turn this around about how you feel about yourself and give yourself some momentum. And she texted back like 3 minutes later, that is so right. I know that'll work. In fact, I feel so good, I don't even have to do it. So that tells you how potent it is to actually be thinking along those lines. So that's my best tool.
Very good, very good. Well, Dr. Lisle, we have to close this session today. We have a lot more questions. We look forward to seeing you the second Tuesday. This month was a little different because Dr. McDougall was on a trip, but we have you scheduled as long as you're willing to do this and be so generous on the second Tuesday, Thursday, sorry, each month. So we'll see you in just a couple of weeks then, right?
Fantastic. We'll see you real soon. Great to see you, Gustavo, as always.
Very good. Me too. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And remember to send questions to webinar@drmcdougall.com. And I promise I keep your questions even if we don't get to them right away. But at some point or another, we'll answer them. And now we have 3 webinars that we have done with Dr. Lisle. Go back and review them. I did, actually, Dr. Lisle. Hopefully you'll be proud of me. And I took a lot of notes as I was, I'm going backwards as I was watching the webinar. They're so packed with information that I thank you again very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Always great to see you, Gustavo. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to everybody's question, but we'll cover as much ground as we can.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week with Dr. McDougall. He will be back from his trip to Alaska, and we have a really, really good session planned for next week. Thank you again. Goodbye, Dr. Lisle.
That's bye, folks.
Okay, bye-bye.